Welcome to a new episode of the Geopolitical Puzzle. Today, my guest is Joseph Wehmeyer, press intern at the United States Senate. Joseph Wehmeyer is the author of the article What Would Greenland's Independence Mean for the Arctic, published in the Council on Foreign Relations. In this episode, we will analyze his article and the possible geopolitical implications of Greenland's independence, its strategic location, and how climate change is a crucial part of its geopolitical impact on the Arctic Circle and the world. Joseph, how are you? It's a pleasure to have you as a guest in this episode. Thank you for accepting my invitation for the Geopolitical Puzzle. How are you?
I'm doing well, Juan Carlos. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
As I mentioned in the intro, we will discuss your great article about Greenland. But to get into the context, first I would like to ask you, could you briefly share about Greenland? What do you know? What you know about it? Where it's located, population, capital, the economy, the GDP, and what inspired you to write this article? What will Greenland's independence mean for the Arctic?
Yeah, so to give a little bit of basic context, Greenland is the world's largest island that's not a continent, and it's also one of the most sparsely populated countries in the entire world. It is about 3 times the size of Texas, situated in the North Atlantic, a little bit north of Iceland, and most of it lies in the Arctic Circle. It's about 80% of it is covered in ice, leaving the vast majority of its 58,000 people living on the coast. Its capital is Nuuk on its western coast. It has a GDP of about 3.24 billion as of 2021, which is among the lowest in the world. But its small population does all right with a GDP per capita of about $57,000. Greenland is a part of Denmark, so it remains largely reliant on Denmark for a lot of its affairs. We can get into a little bit of that later, but that's essentially where Greenland is located. And as I said, it is part of Denmark, which is kind of interesting because Denmark's a very small country in Northern Europe, and Greenland is this massive island in the North Atlantic. So it leads a little bit of questions as to how that relationship came to be. And what inspired me to write this article is there's been various separatist and independence movements over the last decade that have been particularly interesting to me. Movements in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, and Catalonia in Spain that have caught my eye as to wonder what would it look like if these parts of these countries were to break off from the countries they were formerly a part of. And so I was watching this video of a guy named Johnny Harris who had done a couple of videos where he went to Greenland and he covered some of these topics and went and explored the country himself. And it really got me thinking about looking a little bit further north to a country that's not that often looked at and wondering what would that process look like for Greenland if it were to occur.
Also, I did my research for this conversation, and then I found very interesting information. Like, for example, Greenland's economy depends on exports of shrimp and fish. This enormous, of course, have the help from the Danish government. Let's dig a little bit about your article about this fascinating island. As we know, and you mentioned, Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. But to this unique status, Greenland has extensive type of self-government. So in April 2023, a constitutional commission presented Greenland's, I would say, like the first draft of the constitution they call Inatsisartut. My question is, Joseph, what is the Greenland's political status right now?
Yeah, so right now, Greenland is a self-governing Danish territory. They're a self-governing territory under the country of Denmark. Greenland has been a part of Denmark since 1721, initially as a colony, and then they gained increasing autonomy since 1979. And Greenland still heavily relies on Denmark for financial support, as well as the management of its monetary policy, defense, and foreign relations. But other than that, Greenland's own government, its own parliament, manages most of its domestic and internal affairs, with a unicameral legislature in Nuuk of 31 seats. In order to advocate on behalf of itself in the Danish parliament. Greenlandic parties have 2 seats in the 179 seat Danish parliament, where, like I said, they can't advocate on behalf of their own affairs, but ultimate decision making over monetary policy, defense, and foreign relations at the end of the day will be controlled in Denmark's capital, Copenhagen. As I said, they have gained increasing autonomy in recent years, notably in a 2008 referendum in which 75% of Greenlandic citizens voted in favor of the Act on Greenland Self-Government. Big thing about this act was that it essentially said that Greenland can achieve full independence via a referendum, so long as they also got approval to do so from the Danish parliament. And so in April 2023, here we are, this first draft of a constitution is unveiled, but it's unclear exactly how that would take place. What would the relationship with Denmark and other countries look like going forward? There are a couple questions that remain to be asked about how that process would happen. Some experts have cautioned that it wouldn't be such a hard breakaway as like what Brexit was with the UK and the European Union, but it remains to be seen what that process would look like, and a lot of questions do remain.
And you know what? It's interesting because the I don't know they call it Greenlanders, I would say, right? They are they are part of the European Union in the same time. They have a nationality as a Danish as well, even though they are Greenlanders. This is very interesting. And also, when I was doing my research for this conversation, I found two crucial players in Greenland. One is the Prime Minister, Mute Egede, or Ejede, and the second is Akida Matilda, who is a Danish parliament member. So what I found is they are trying to do is break the from the colonial chain, right? And than the native or indigenous people from Greenland have more participation in politics and the decision for the island, which is kind of fair, in my opinion. So, my question, Joseph, is if Greenland becomes independent from Denmark, what will be the consequence for the island? What is the Copenhagen reaction when you wrote your article and when you did your research? What did you found? What is the Copenhagen's reaction?
Yeah, so for now, it seems like Copenhagen would like to hold on to Greenland in whatever way that it can. I think that there have been moves that have signaled trying to give Greenland a little bit more diplomatic and representative independence and having their own representatives join diplomatic missions at the United Nations or even within NATO, which Denmark is a member of. But I think at the end of the day, there has been no formal push to try to accommodate Greenlandic independence from taking place. There hasn't necessarily been any pushback, but I think that the Danish government has likely remained largely silent on it, simply because if there's no public pressure, they're not going to feel any incentive to try to have to give it up. At the end of the day, they still have a relationship with Greenland that they have historic ties with. There are Danes who live in Greenland, although it's only about 10% of the population. So I think that if Copenhagen could avoid it, they would like to hold on to it. But it seems something that over the coming decades will likely be inevitable, that there will continue to be increasing autonomy for Greenland. And it's already played out in a number of ways. Greenland has gained more autonomy over its economic affairs. There used to be a shipping monopoly from Denmark that pretty much controlled all trade to and from the island. That has now shifted from Denmark to operating out of Greenland. They operate out of increasing ports and in increasing amounts of countries, as well as just being able to gain more autonomy in diplomatic affairs as well. Countries have started to reopen consulates in Greenland and take more of an interest in them. So it's unclear when that pressure will come to a peak and a rise, but at some point over the coming decades, I would expect these trends to continue.
Greenland just becoming a very important hub in the between the two continents. Let's see, Europe and North America, right? It's Russia, Alaska, Canada, etc. And something I found very interesting when I read your article is the global demand for rare earth metals. has increased quickly. The value is exceeding like a $10 billion just in 2020. Huh? So regarding our geopolitics, your article mentioned climate change accelerating geopolitical competition in the Arctic. Could you elaborate a little bit because these rare earth metals will play or are playing already an important role not only for Greenland itself, for the world, for the planet. So, what are your thoughts?
Important to talk about, as you mentioned, is the fact that another reason why Greenland is of a lot of interest, not only because of its location and its size, it's also important because it is host or believed to be host to a lot of important natural resources. There's believed to be about somewhere between 10 to 30% of undiscovered fossil fuels and oil and natural gas reserves off the island, as well as large deposits of rare earth metals and rare earth minerals underneath its ice, which is yet to be really fully tapped into. Now, the Greenlandic government seems to have some mixed feelings about how to tap into these resources going forward. For example, in 2021, they made a ruling to cease issuing new licenses to tap into oil and gas reserves off the island. But the future with rare earth metals is a little bit unclear. There's a lot more room for potential, and a lot of countries, and specifically big powers such as the United States and China, have an increasing eye to try to find rare earth metal deposits where they can tap into to be able to reduce their reliance on other countries, mainly each other, as a source of these rare earth metals, which are essential for smart technology and electric vehicles. Greenland has started to open up access and expand access to give certain countries and private companies mining rights, but it's still believed to be operating on a pretty small scale. But countries such as China, the United States, even Canada have taken an increasing interest in the rare earth metal deposits that Greenland has, which is they are becoming more accessible as climate change accelerates in the Arctic and
Exactly.
the ice will begin to melt and it will begin to thaw.
Exactly. They will have the opportunity, right? It's very interesting because certainly they will have a lot of competition in this. So, in addition of the natural resource that the island has, and just we discussed, also, in my opinion, this situation represent a target it's not target, I would say risk in terms of global security. Countries like China, China is everywhere, and Russia. And now we know right now that Russia having the conflict with Ukraine and represent a threat. These couple, Russia and China represent a threat. So because they want, as we said, access to these rare metals. And the island has a very strategic location and it's important getaway to the Arctic and it's essential, for the United States security and the whole continent, which is critical from a geopolitical perspective. So, what are your thoughts in this situation? We know that after the Second World War, United States, built a very important base in Greenland, and also Denmark, of course, has support the island with with military resources. So, what are your thoughts from the geopolitical perspective? These kind of threats that the island could have.
Yeah, so you bring up a really good point, which is that Greenland has a very important strategic location. And just to add on a little bit about the other developments that could come as a result of climate change, in addition to ice melting on the island itself, ice is continually melted in the Arctic Ocean itself, which has opened up and will continue to open up more and more room for ships to be able to pass through. It opens up shipping lanes commercially, but it also opens up shipping lanes that could be used militarily and strategically. We've seen Arctic nations building up their military fleets and icebreaker ships to be able to access more area in the region, whether that's to tap into resources or what could potentially be used to tap into any military and strategic chokeholds in the future. So, what this means for US security, I think, is it is important for the US military to continue to want to have a presence there. They have their northernmost US
Mhm.
military installation called Patufik Space Base, formerly called Thule Air Force Base. It's important for It's crucial for ballistic missile warnings and satellite capabilities. And the
Oh, I
U.S.
see.
forces have also held joint military exercises there with Danish soldiers for Arctic training. Now, in terms of what I think that the US will do going forward, I think that the US has shown an interest in continuing to maintain and strengthen ties with Greenland. Under the Trump administration, the US reopened its consulate in 2020. And under the Biden administration, it has renewed its contract and it's renewed its contract to keep that space base operating. And it's also recommitted to donating some foreign aid. So it's shown a demonstrated interest in maintaining its presence on the island. And I just wanted to touch a little bit upon why having that base is important, because within the Arctic Circle itself, Russia has a lot of military bases, old and new. They're reopening a lot of former bases within the Arctic Circle, ports, airstrips, some that used to be operated when Russia was the Soviet Union. But the US, since the Cold War has ended and drew down, they used to have more of a presence up north to potentially defend against any threats in the Arctic that the Soviets could pose. But after the Soviet Union collapsed, there didn't really seem to be as much of a need for them anymore. They used to have more bases in Greenland, but they've since shut down. Now that Russia has been ramping up its activity, including even a ICBM test in northern oceans just weeks ago, this presence for the US and also for other Western countries to have is become increasingly important, and it's shown its significance because Russia is demonstrating increasingly aggressive actions, not only with its invasion of Ukraine, but now Greenland is left in a position wondering,
Exactly.
well, we don't have a standing army to defend ourselves. We rely on Denmark for our own defense. It seems likely that even though there was some past resentment with US military presence in past decades, now the US and other NATO countries offer an opportunity to protect against an increasingly aggressive Russia. And it's also important for the US to have a foothold there as Russia expands in the region, and China, even though it doesn't have any territory in the
Right.
Arctic Circle, has declared itself a near Arctic state and thus claims to have a vested interest to be able to explore economically and militarily in the region as well.
I don't think the army of Denmark is pretty big. I don't think I think the army is very small. So United States has to play important role in the whole circle. Not just Greenland, the whole circle, because Russia has territory, as you mentioned as well. And Canada. So before wrapping up, Joseph, elections are coming in Greenland, the parliament elections in 2025. So what future awaits to the island in the coming years? Because what I read is like more than two-thirds of Greenland's adult population support the independence. What futures, in your opinion, based in the research for this article, what do you think? What are the future? We will see a total independence in 2025 or in the years to come. What are your thoughts?
I'm not sure that I expect independence to come all that quick. Even for Greenland's most pro-independent parties, which is which do not occupy or which do not lead in the government right now, even the most pro-independent parties have shown an interest to maintain some semblance of a relationship with Denmark, and that even if independence was to take place again, there's been an emphasis that there would be a gradual process in order to do so. I think the fact that there hasn't been much rhetoric or many major recent developments regarding the constitution that was unveiled after it was initially unveiled maybe shows that there might be some pause in terms of the independence movement's pace and how fast it's moving. I think what will be interesting indicators is to see how do diplomatic relations continue to unfold, and maybe some other key developments that are relevant to Greenland, such as various climate change developments, and also in and
Exactly. I
yeah,
was thinking that. I was thinking right now about that. How the climate change is going to be in the future, in the years to come, is going to be a critical, in this, let's see, independence or not. It's going to be very, very interesting in the years to come.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just remains to be seen. I think, as I was referencing earlier in regards to Copenhagen's reaction, I think unless there are existing pressures from Greenland, which has a fairly small population, internally within Denmark, which there doesn't really seem to be a reason for there to be any right now unless any major national events happen, or if there's pressure from the international community, I don't really see Copenhagen having an interest to change the status quo. But if anything else happens in international affairs, whether Russia decides to expand its fight elsewhere, or the US sees a need to expand its presence in Greenland, or climate change accelerates and opens up an opportunity to mine resources, then maybe we would see other countries taking more of immediate interest in Greenland's independence and what could come out of it. But as of now, I don't think that it has enough wind in its sails to have
Exactly.
anything major happen by 2025.
Yeah, that's a good point. But right now we are seeing it's not about the size, it's what you have as a country. It's not anymore, oh, the big country no, it's what you have. Okay, this territory have gas, oil, or let's go there. Even is small or even is big. Joseph, is there anything that you would like to add to this conversation based in your article?
I guess I would just say I would encourage people to go and read the article on cfr.org. I'm sure it will be linked or easily accessible from here, I hope. But otherwise, no, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me on, Juan Carlos. I really enjoyed being able to talk with you. And yeah, it was a delight to be on here.
No, thank you so much. Yes, the link of the article will be in the descriptions of this episode. Joseph, I would like to say thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Juan Carlos. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you so much. I am Juan Carlos Giraldo from Boston, United States. Thank you so much, everyone. The article written by Joseph Wehmeyer about Greenland, which is the topic of discussion in this episode, was written during his work as an editorial intern at the Council of Foreign Relations. This conversation is based on the research he conducted for the article and its content. Any predictions or contributions are his personal views, and opinions are not necessarily the views of the Council on Foreign Relations.